When a journalist tries to corner JD Vance with provoking questions about his past on live TV, he thinks he's in control. But then, everything flips in a way no one saw coming. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now picture this. The studio lights were blazing that evening at one of America's most watched talk shows. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as JD Vance, our newly inaugurated vice president, stepped onto the set, fresh from taking his oath of office. Vance carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to hide and everything to prove. But Marcus Bennett, the show's host, had other plans. Known for his sharp tongue and liberal bias, Bennett had spent weeks preparing for this moment. His producer had promised a respectful discussion about the new administration, but the glint in Bennett's eyes told a different story. As Vance took his seat, the usual pre-interview pleasantries were rushed, almost mechanical. Bennett's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and the production team seemed unusually tense. Something was off, and Vance, with his Marine Corps background, could sense an ambush coming. Years of military training had taught him to read rooms like this, and right now every instinct was telling him that Bennett had loaded his questions with carefully hidden landmines. The first question came with a smile, but Vance noticed Bennett's white-knuckled grip on his interview cards. "Mr. Vice President," Bennett began, his voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "let's talk about your remarkable journey, from Trump critic to his second-in-command." Vance smiled, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of someone who had grown from life's challenges. "You know, Marcus, that's actually a perfect place to start, because it speaks to something bigger than just politics. It speaks to the American capacity for growth and understanding." The audience leaned forward slightly. This wasn't the defensive response Bennett had expected. The host shifted in his chair, his prepared follow-up suddenly feeling less potent. "Growth and understanding?" Bennett's tone carried a hint of mockery. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because some might say it's more about political convenience." "You see, Marcus," Vance replied, his voice steady and clear, "in America, we have this incredible tradition, being able to change our minds when presented with new information. When I criticized the president years ago, I was looking at things through a narrow lens. But then I saw something remarkable. I saw how his policies were actually helping the forgotten Americans I wrote about in my book." Bennett's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. Vance continued, "Let me ask you something, Marcus. Have you ever changed your mind about something important? Have you ever looked at the evidence and realized your initial judgment might have been wrong?" Bennett hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "We're here to talk about your changes, Mr. Vice President, not mine." He shuffled his cards, clearly eager to move to his next planned attack. "Speaking of changes," Bennett pressed, "let's discuss your recent speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. You spoke about divine guidance in government decisions. Don't you think that's a dangerous mixing of church and state?" The audience tensed. Bennett had just stepped onto sacred ground, and the glint in Vance's eyes suggested he'd been waiting for exactly this kind of challenge. "Divine guidance, Marcus?" Vance leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "What I actually said was that our founding fathers understood the importance of moral guidance in leadership. They weren't afraid of faith, they were afraid of tyranny." A few amens echoed from the audience. Bennett's jaw tightened. "But surely," Bennett started, "in our modern, diverse society—" Vance raised his hand slightly. "Let me finish this thought, because it's important." His tone was respectful but firm. "When I took my oath of office, I placed my hand on the Bible, the same way leaders have done throughout our nation's history. Not because we're establishing a state religion, but because we understand that our rights come from God, not from government." Bennett glanced at his producer, who was watching intently from the sidelines. "You know what's interesting, Marcus?" Vance continued, his voice carrying a hint of personal reflection. "When I was a Marine, nobody questioned our chaplain's presence. Nobody complained when we prayed before missions, because in those moments of truth, even the skeptics understand there's something deeper than politics." Bennett's face flushed slightly. "Let's move on," Bennett said abruptly, "to your relationship with President Trump. Your recent statement about him being God's instrument for America's renewal. Don't you think that's a bit extreme?" Vance didn't flinch. What I think is extreme, he said calmly, is how some in the media seem more concerned about a leader who prays than about policies that hurt American families. He paused, letting the words sink in. But since you brought up President Trump, let's talk about results instead of rhetoric. Let's talk about what's actually happening in our community since the inauguration. The studio grew remarkably quiet. Even Bennett's usual rapid-fire interruption style seemed momentarily subdued by Vance's steady presence and measured responses. Bennett's composure started cracking, and from that moment on, the entire dynamic of the interview changed. This is just the beginning of how JD Vance dismantled a journalist's attempted ambush with logic, confidence, and unwavering conviction. Stay tuned for the full breakdown, and if you believe in standing firm in your principles, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Because sometimes the best response to arrogance is dignity, and the strongest answer to bias is truth. God bless you and God bless America.